Imagine walking through a city where thousands of people once lived, only to find empty apartments, abandoned schools, silent streets, and buildings slowly being reclaimed by nature. Some places were destroyed by disaster. Others collapsed when the industries that created them disappeared. And a few have stories far stranger than that. Welcome back to the TOP7. Today, we're exploring 7 abandoned cities and settlements that still exist today. Let's begin. Number 7. Hashima Island, Japan. Imagine an entire city squeezed onto a tiny island, surrounded by concrete walls and open ocean, then abandoned almost overnight. That's Hashima Island. Located off the coast of Japan, this former coal mining settlement began developing after a mining operation was established there in 1887. Workers and their families arrived in growing numbers, and the island was eventually purchased by Mitsubishi as coal production expanded. During World War II, however, Hashima entered a much darker chapter. Korean and Chinese laborers were forced to work in the mines under harsh conditions. After the war, the island continued growing. By the 1950s, around 5,200 people were living on less than 1 square kilometer of land, making Hashima one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Concrete apartment blocks rose above the shoreline. The island had schools, shops, swimming pools, and other facilities needed to support its tightly packed community. Then, everything changed. In 1974, Mitsubishi closed the coal mine. With the industry's main purpose gone, residents quickly left, and the island was abandoned. Today, those apartment buildings and public spaces remain empty, creating the haunting skyline that earned Hashima the nickname Battleship Island. The site later became part of a UNESCO World Heritage designation, although its history remains controversial because of the forced labor associated with the mines. Visitors can now tour designated sections of the island, getting a rare glimpse of what happens when an industrial community suddenly loses the reason it existed. Number 6. Pripyat, Ukraine. Some cities disappear slowly. Pripyat effectively lost its population in a matter of hours. Built near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Pripyat was home to workers, scientists, and their families. By 1986, roughly 49,000 people lived there. Then came April 26. Reactor number 4 at Chernobyl suffered a catastrophic accident, releasing radioactive material into the surrounding environment. At first, everyday life in Pripyat continued, but the danger soon became impossible to ignore. Within roughly 36 hours, residents were evacuated. Many believed they would eventually return, leaving personal possessions behind. For most of them, that return never happened. The Soviet authorities established an exclusion zone around the power plant and surrounding areas, and Pripyat became one of the world's most famous abandoned cities. Apartment blocks still stand. Schools remain empty. Personal belongings were left behind as nature gradually moved back into streets once filled with people. The disaster also had lasting health consequences for people exposed to radiation. Today, Pripyat remains one of the most powerful reminders of the Chernobyl disaster, a city built around nuclear power that became synonymous with what can happen when that technology goes catastrophically wrong. Number 5. Kennecott, Alaska. Deep in the Alaskan wilderness sits a ghost town that once helped produce a fortune. Kennecott grew around one thing: copper. Between 1911 and 1938, the area's mines produced approximately $200 million worth of copper ore, a staggering amount for the time and equivalent to billions of dollars in later value. For years, miners and their families lived in this remote corner of Alaska, while enormous quantities of valuable ore were extracted from the surrounding mountains. But mining towns survive only as long as there's something profitable to mine. By 1938, the operation had closed. Without the mines, there was little reason for the community to remain, and Kennecott became a ghost town. Unlike many abandoned industrial settlements, however, it wasn't simply forgotten. The site eventually became part of Wrangell St. Elias National Park and Preserve, the largest national park in the United States. Today, its historic mining buildings stand against an enormous backdrop of mountains and wilderness, giving visitors a remarkable look at Alaska's industrial past. Kennecott may no longer produce copper, but its isolation and preserved structures have given it a second life as a destination for curious travelers. If you're enjoying these forgotten places, take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are still 4 extraordinary ghost towns ahead. Number 4. Kolmanskop, Namibia. What happens when a wealthy desert town is abandoned? Eventually, the desert comes inside. Kolmanskop began in 1908 after a railway worker discovered a diamond in what is now southern Namibia. Word spread quickly. German settlers and miners arrived, and the settlement grew into an unexpectedly luxurious community surrounded by the Namib Desert. At its peak, Kolmanskop had a hospital, ballroom, theater, sports hall, casino, and other impressive facilities. According to the source, it even had the Southern Hemisphere's first X-ray station and Africa's first tram. But the prosperity didn't last. In 1928, richer diamond deposits were discovered around 260 kilometers farther south. At the same time, Kolmanskop's own deposits began declining. Residents gradually followed the diamonds elsewhere. By 1956, the town had been completely abandoned, and then the desert took over. Today, sand pours through broken windows and open doors. Some rooms are filled knee-deep, while dunes have swallowed floors that once belonged to comfortable homes. Kolmanskop can still be visited, although because it lies within a restricted area of the Namib Desert, visitors need permission to enter. It's a striking reminder that when people leave, nature doesn't wait long to reclaim what remains. Number 3. Ashgabat, Turkmenistan. Our next city is different from everything else on this list, because technically, Ashgabat isn't abandoned at all. It's the capital of Turkmenistan. Yet its enormous marble buildings, monumental public spaces, and unusually quiet streets have given parts of the city a ghostly reputation. Ashgabat was designed to project wealth and grandeur. The source describes massive monuments, elaborate statues, a major mosque, sporting facilities, and extraordinary quantities of white marble. In fact, the city became famous for its marble-covered architecture. But behind that polished appearance lies a striking contrast. The source argues that government spending on prestige projects, combined with economic hardship and extremely high living costs, helped create the impression of a magnificent city with surprisingly little street life. Residents have also faced displacement linked to redevelopment projects. So Ashgabat isn't a traditional ghost town like Kolmanskop or Pripyat. People still live and work there. What makes it fascinating is the disconnect between its monumental scale and the emptiness often associated with its carefully planned public spaces. It can feel less like an abandoned city and more like a city built for crowds that never arrived. Number 2. Plymouth, Montserrat. In 1995, the people of Plymouth discovered that a volcano, believed to have been dormant for centuries, was very much alive. Plymouth was the capital and economic center of Montserrat, a British overseas territory in the Caribbean. Then the Soufriere Hills volcano began erupting. Pyroclastic flows and ash threatened the southern part of the island, forcing Plymouth's residents to evacuate. Some were eventually allowed to return. But the danger wasn't over. In 1997, another major series of eruptions struck the area, and the evacuation became permanent for most residents. Then, between August 4 and August 8, further eruptions devastated approximately 80% of Plymouth, burying large sections beneath roughly 1.4 meters of ash and volcanic debris. Buildings burned. Homes disappeared beneath the material. Much of the economic heart of Montserrat was destroyed. The disaster caused major population displacement, with many islanders eventually relocating to the United Kingdom. Even today, parts of southern Montserrat remain within an exclusion zone because of the continuing volcanic threat. Plymouth still officially exists, but much of it lies buried and abandoned beneath the legacy of the eruption. Few ghost towns demonstrate nature's destructive power quite as dramatically. Number 1. Bodie, California. If you've ever imagined walking into a real Wild West ghost town, Bodie comes remarkably close. The story began in 1859, when gold was discovered in eastern California near the Nevada border. But the real boom came after richer deposits were found in 1876. Prospectors rushed into the area. By 1879, Bodie had somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 residents and roughly 2,000 buildings, and it quickly developed a reputation. Saloons, gambling, brothels, and violent confrontations helped turn Bodie into the kind of rough frontier town that would later become legendary in Western stories. But gold towns rarely stay prosperous forever. As mining declined, so did Bodie's population. By 1910, only a few hundred residents remained. The final mine closed in 1942, and by the end of World War II, the town was effectively deserted. Instead of allowing Bodie to disappear completely, California eventually stepped in. It became a National Historic Landmark, and Bodie State Historic Park was established in the early 1960s. Around 170 surviving structures have been preserved in what's known as a state of arrested decay. They're not restored to look new. They're simply protected from deteriorating further. That means visitors can walk through a genuine ghost town where buildings still stand much as they were left behind. Ironically, Bodie may now attract more people as an abandoned town than it ever did as a dying mining community. Cities can take decades or even centuries to build, yet sometimes all it takes is one disaster, one economic collapse, or one disappearing industry to empty them. What's left behind can feel eerie, but these places are more than collections of ruined buildings. They're frozen pieces of history. If you could safely explore one abandoned place anywhere in the world, where would you go? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more extraordinary places and stories from around the world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.